Well, as was to be expected, the falling devil was not in the least bit fazed by that big giant ultimate attack that Yoru put on it. Even using every single weapon that Yoru has conjured over the course of the series, all of that combined strength and damage was just not enough to actually critically wound a devil of falling's power, because we've gotten it explained to us multiple times over that primal fears, especially ones like darkness or falling, are a significantly larger threat than the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I know a lot of people in the community still argue back and forth that something like the Darkness Devil stood absolutely no chance against Makima the Control Devil, but I think the way that Falling presents herself here, I think it's very obvious. Falling says that no matter what Yoru ever did, a man-made fear like war would never stand to a fear that awakens in every human being the moment they are born. Falling is not something man-made, it's an instinctual fear. Of course it would be stronger than something like war that is only caused by humans. Realistically, everything is afraid of falling. Animals are afraid of falling. Hey guys, real quick, if you want to support the channel, make sure you go down to gamersubs.gg/noop and get 10% off your nootropics and energy supplement fix, and we'll get back to the video. The big portion of this chapter focuses on Denji and Yoru finally being put in a position where Denji being turned into a weapon makes sense. Not only are they against the wall, having absolutely no chance of surviving this battle, even though Falling Devil doesn't really have any plans of killing Denji or Yoru, right? Falling Devil knows that Denji and Yoru are big proponents of the plan that Death Devil has. Therefore, she can only cause minor wounds to them, as she says it. Although, with them both being devils, minor wounds can look like a lot of different things, which we see at the very end of this chapter with multiple of the swords that Yoru shot against Falling all coming back and stabbing Yoru in the brain. But before we get to that point, because I do want to talk about that a little bit, because the community is kind of divided on what's going to happen next in this next chapter. I do believe we go on a break after this, so of course we have a great cliffhanger that will make us question what the heck could possibly go on, and then it probably will just get forgotten about and moved on in the next plot point, as Fujimoto casually almost always does. We seem to always focus on the wrong things in this community, but funnily enough, broken clocks are right twice a day, because when we get things right, we are so right, and it's always crazy to me how we even came close to theorizing something like that. But anyway, with Denji and Yoru in a position that they know they can't win, Yoru says, all right, well, the only option we have is making my next ultimate weapon, my second final desperation move. And she puts her hand right on top of Denji, and at that moment Asa stops her very quickly and says, hey, stop, Denji, run away, she wants to turn you into a weapon. And of course, Asa just basically more or less admitted that she at least cares about Denji last chapter. She wants to make Denji happy, and she wants to be able to, turn their depressing lives around, which I love. I think Asa, of all people, is, a great match for Denji, because they've just been able to be there for each other in multiple different ways throughout all of part 2. So the fact that these two characters are now at least willing to, Denji's gonna take whatever he can get, right? But Asa is at least willing to say, hey, Denji, you know what? You're stupid. I understand that, but we'll think about it together, as opposed to every other woman in Denji's life that has wanted to make decisions for him. Denji, in this moment, in this vulnerability that he's feeling, realizing that, you know what, I caused innumerable death and countless different kinds of pain to all of these different people. The Fire Devil really put it into perspective, and the Falling Devil really hit, the ball home for him to understand that he's been doing nothing but living a hedonistic lifestyle that has been hurting everyone around him. You could argue that Denji has never had a choice, because from the very beginning, he's never known what normal is, and even though he tries his best to be normal, the forces at play around him constantly shift him and change him around to where he can't exactly get a good grasp of what normal is. At the same time, though, that doesn't erase his accountability. So Denji, in this moment, realizing that this might be the best possible way to atone, especially after what Asa said to him earlier, where they're superheroes. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. Even though Denji never asked for this position, Denji is Chainsaw Man, and with being Chainsaw Man, he has a duty to potentially help people from living that same life that he had to. And right now, not seeing any other future in his position, right? Denji is too weak to even stop the falling devil, too weak to do anything against death, and he is just a blithering idiot and just an absolute emotional mess at the same time right now. He is competent in one chapter and completely distraught the next because his emotional status is just so wishy-washy. Because of everything he's been through, you know, he can constantly say he's over something, but when he keeps getting traumatized further and further, he just keeps getting pushed back into it. It's one step forward, two steps back. Denji sees the only way out of this is, hey, you know what? I don't want to think. Which is sad, but it makes sense. I mean, Denji sees this as, again, a way to atone and lighten his sins, as he says. Instead of being forced to, you know, do things while he's a human and, you know, constantly have to deal with the regret afterwards, Denji says, hey, you know what? Turn me into a weapon, and if you can stop the falling devil, stop the death devil, then you know what? At least I was able to live up to my Chainsaw Man name and be somewhat of a hero at the end of everything. Which Asa disagrees with, obviously. Asa does not want that to happen. But Yoru, in this desperation, we've seen the kind of decisions that Yoru is able to make. Yoru, when she was going up against Pochita, was more than willing to sacrifice her two children, the Gun Devil and the Tank Devil, without any bit of hesitation in order to get a upper hand in that battle. And that, honestly, having that moment occur multiple chapters ago to now parallel with this moment where she's basically in the exact same position, yet having everything she needs right in front of her, Denji's permission, the dominance and abilities of her war powers progressing to the point that she should be able to transform Denji now actually having everything she wants, she stops and says, you know what, on second thought, I'd rather not. And she starts to blush, which is obviously the reveal that something that we've kind of theorized for the longest time now, ever since the Aging Devil story. Yoru does have feelings for Denji. Yoru, despite being the War Devil and her romantic feelings being skewed, almost always, you know, wanting to terrorize Denji and wanting to, you know, commit terrible murderous actions with him, and just being an overall just a crazy, you know, devilish person in general. That is still actual feelings that she has. It is still actual genuine love to a certain degree. And to the point, Denji means more to her than her own children. She was willing to sacrifice Gun and Tank, but she's not willing to sacrifice Denji. Or maybe she has some kind of other ulterior motives or thoughts behind not wanting to transform Denji. But again, this has been her goal from the very beginning, and she chooses to get attacked and potentially lethally wounded by falling instead of having the weapon she's always sought out for. And I think that's meaningful and proves that Yoru has changed too. What the story is going to show us after this, are we going to be at, you know, the Death and Falling Devil's disposal now? Are we going to get trapped, wounded, and incapacitated until we are needed again? Or is something else going to happen? Is Yoru going to be able to create a weapon from something else out of the love she has for Denji, as opposed to the want to war? And we'll just have to wait and see. Because again, everything that Yoru had at her disposal was not enough to stop falling. So I don't know what these characters are going to do to get out of this situation. However, I'm interested to see it. That's for sure. I have seen a little bit of discussion in the community about this potentially being the very thing that splits Yoru and Asa, or this being a wound that's, you know, lethal enough to actually kill one of them that has to result in them being healed. I mean, Denji had his limbs chopped off 27 times and he was still fine. Denji has been decapitated before. And while Asa may not be the exact same kind of half devil that Denji is, it could be that it's not a lethal wound. It could be. At this point in Chainsaw Man, we can't predict anything, but I did want to mention that and see what you guys thought about the entire idea of this being a wound that actually kills either Yoru or Asa. And this last split second hesitation is something that leaves us with one of these characters being killed, which would be interesting to see. Again, I don't know if that's a good possibility. I've seen a lot of people say that this is the chance they have to split these two characters and personalities apart. I don't know. But let me know down in the comments and let me know your guys' thoughts. I'm very interested to see it, especially considering we have a decent amount of break ahead of us before we get to see what unfolds from all of this. So guys, thank you so much for watching. And if you do enjoy this Chainsaw Man content, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future Chainsaw Man videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.